Hello, I'm Sarah Lister from Sheffield Digital, and today I'm talking to James Jefferies, who is a freelance creative technologist and director of Shedcode. How did your career in technology begin?
Hi Sarah. So my career technology began. I was a bit privileged really, as being a child of the 80s. My dad had a ZX81, so right back then I was able to learn Sinclair Basic and do some simple coding on that machine, which only had like 1K of memory, so you had to be pretty careful what you did with it. And I was lucky to get a Spectrum for Christmas, which was my own machine, and I did a bit of programming on that. The machine came with a manual which had taught you how to do basic coding in Sinclair Basic was the language. So I was able to do a bit of that as well. So that's really when I started. But I kind of sort of lost interest in it a bit because I was more excited in playing games. And at school we had a way of trading games and copying games and doing all that. So I didn't really do that much coding after that until I got to uni, where I did a maths degree, but there was also some computing modules. So I took some of those and learnt programming languages like Fortran and COBOL, still going strong, and also Pascal, which was quite formative for me in a way, because that whole course was called Programming for Change. The idea being that you'd write some software, but you'd write it in a way that you would know that things were going to change in the future. It was never just like you write it in stone and that's it. And some of those lessons from that have stuck with me ever since. But after I graduated, I did teacher training. So I trained as a maths teacher, and I was in two minds really whether I wanted to teach or not. In some ways, I felt a bit young for it, coming straight from uni, and so I applied for teaching jobs and I applied for technology jobs. And I was really fortunate to get on the graduate intake at Barclays, which was relatively near to where I lived. And their whole idea for graduate intake was quite different from usual as well. They like to take people who had business knowledge and then train them in technology, rather than try to get people who were already technology people and then try and teach them about how the business worked. So I was a bit lucky really to get on that, but a lot of the other people were people like with MBAs and things like that, which I'd not done anything like that. And we really learned a lot of the basics of at that time. It was the bank had a policy that everything was Unix based, so or mainframe based, and I was on the Unix course, so I learned a lot of that stuff from scratch and put that into practice. And that was, working for a bank. I think I probably have some ethical issues about working for Barclays now, but at the time it was, again, it was an incredible place to learn. It was really good to be able to learn how a big organization works, how those sort of politics work in those different places, how to get things done with the right people, but also how to deal and work with things at scale. Working with in a national bank where things go wrong, and to work out what was going on in a branch, you had to log on to this special terminal, and everything was very slow. It went over a slow connection and doing stuff. And it was really good for me to do that. And it was also my first time I did anything with the internet and the web, because Barclays was the first high street bank to have a web presence. And because the intake course that I was on was delayed slightly, we were seconded to another area, and I was lucky to get in this little team who were working on barclays.co.uk. So that was my first time I ever did any HTML on a web page. It's incredibly basic when you look back at it now, but I did a little bit of that then. So that was sort of my start in doing web stuff. So yeah, I worked at Barclays, and then after that I worked for Empower, the utility company, and that was a job doing support. Really, it was a support role. And again, that was really useful to me, because so many developers or engineers or people who work in software, they write software, and it's very common back then. You'd write it, then you'd put it all live, and then someone else would then look after it and sort of throw it over the wall. And working on the other side of that wall, where people were doing releases, sometimes you didn't even really know was going to happen, and you were then dealing with people who had support issues. It was a really good, again, a really good learning experience, because you've got to understand some of the issues that people have with software that other people have written. And I think that was, again, formative in a different way. It was like, oh, understanding the consequences of what you do. You don't always see that up front. And after there, I moved to Sheffield, and I got a job working with the agency Technophobia, which a lot of people within the technology scene in Sheffield have either worked for them or will have come across them. And it was a bit of a shock to the system working for an agency like that after working for, you know, big companies that had their own ways of working. But I really learned a lot then about how to. I learned a lot more about the web, really, and about web technology, because I'd already done some of that stuff. I'd even done the stuff back with Barclays, but this was very different, working for an agency that was, you know, solely looking at that and working with designers and different ways of working, really. So that was really sort of that was my last proper job that I had before going freelance. So I was able to really kind of, you know, by that point, I'd got a lot of experience of working in different places and in different environments.
Why did you decide to start your own company in 2011?
Yeah, so 10 years ago this year, it's come up to a 10-year anniversary. But at the time, Technophobia was changing quite a bit. We were sort of working more in partnership with Capita, the big outsourcing and technology company. And my role was becoming more about working on pitches and bids. So, and a lot of that was partnered with Capita. And what I didn't realize at the time was that actually I thought I was, you know, selling Technophobia and we would work on these projects with Capita, but actually Capita were going to buy Technophobia. And with hindsight, it was very easy to see, but at the time it was something like, oh, okay. So going from a small agency of maybe 80 to 100 people to then becoming part of Capita wasn't really a journey that I was keen on. So I gave it a bit of time. I thought it's only fair to do that. But the sort of pitches and things I was working on I was just not very comfortable or very happy with them. And actually it was affecting my mental health. And I look back on it now and I can see that it really got me down. There were days in the office, you know, I was working with people I knew, with people who, you know, are friends to this day. And there were days where I just felt like bursting into tears. And I don't think people would have seen that necessarily. But I just knew that it wasn't right. It wasn't right for me. And so what to do next, really? And I think that, you know, again, very privileged in that I've been able to have these jobs as I've come along. And I've also privileged in the way that my wife works. And she was saying, you know, I can see that you're unhappy. Yeah, it's time, you know, leave. We'll be okay. If you don't have a job, we'll be okay. And I thought, well, okay, well, I can set up my own company. I could go get some contracts and do that sort of work. And if the worst comes to the worst and I don't get anything for a while, we'll be okay. So I handed my notes into Technophobia, set up Shedcode, and I had some savings. I'd made sure that those sort of, you know, last few months at Technophobia, I'd not spent all my money on CDs and sweeties. So I knew that it would be okay if just getting things going initially. So that was the start of it. And I was fortunate in that sense that you often are when you've been somewhere and you set up your own company. I was able to do a little bit of work again back with Technophobia, which was a great start. But I decided that with the money from that, I would generally try to keep that in the company bank account and try not to spend it. So I used some of my savings money and lived pretty frugally for me for that sort of first 6 months to a year of Shedcode, to build up a buffer for a rainy day, really. And again, not everyone can do that, but I was in the fortunate position where I could, and that has been something that I've tried to do, is to keep that rainy day money in the bank for stuff. So when I, you know, starting up freelance, it wasn't really because I had this vision of where I wanted to go. It was more about having a vision of what I didn't want to do, and then thinking, well, maybe I'll try this and see where it takes me.
What shifted your change in direction in 2012?
Yeah, so I had this contract working with Technophobia, and from the beginning, I shared an office with some friends who were three ex Technophobia people who had all gone freelance again themselves. The four of us had an office at Site Gallery down in the city centre, which was a real eye opener for me, because I probably not set foot in Site Gallery before. It's an internationally known contemporary art gallery. And we had an office up on the second floor, but it meant that there was the cafe there. We sort of started to get to know other people in the building and other small businesses that were based there. And I heard that there was a project that was going to happen based at three locations. So at Site Gallery, at Spike Island, which is down in Bristol, at Lighthouse, which is down in Brighton. These are three art galleries or institutions. The project was called Happenstance, and the idea was that two technologists would be technologists in residence at those places. And after hearing about that, I thought that could be quite interesting. We wasn't really too sure what to expect, but I thought, I like here at Site, I like the people, and I already know it, so why not apply? So I applied to that and was fortunate to be offered a place. And so it's a 12-week residency that started in sort of March time and ran through to sort of June time. And I was partnered with Layla Johnson, who is an incredible person in terms of creativity and of ideas, and actually getting things done as well, and moving fast and trying things out. And she was the ideal partner for me, someone who'd just come from working on a contract on a banking system and wanted to sort of explore, really. And so we spent those 12 weeks and we worked on all kinds of things. We built a little device with a receipt printer where you could tweet and send it text messages, and it would print out those text messages on the little receipt printer. We made a drawing machine where, again, you could send messages to it, and it would, with a pen, it would draw the thing. And we had a lot of fun doing those kinds of things, and it kind of opened doors and opened really, for me, gave me a bit more of a vision of where I wanted to go and where I wanted to take Shedcode. So again, a fantastic opportunity. But part of it as well was helping Site Gallery understand some things from technology world that maybe they're not exposed to. And some of those things, for those of us who work in technology, might be everyday simple things. So using something like Trello at the time for just putting tasks on a board and letting people move things around and prioritize stuff meant that was something they could try to see if it worked for them. And so some of the things that we talked about with them were tools, digital tools. Some of the things we talked about were more like processes. So a bit about, agile methodologies, and maybe thinking about some of the projects that they do that they're planning quite a way in advance. Maybe they could, look at how they could do some things as sprints, and they say, okay, well, we'll just do it, So just really talking about those things, and not necessarily saying in any way, you should do this is the right way to do it, but almost like laying a whole lot of things on the table and saying, well, you could try this and that might work for you, and that might work for you. And so it was a real two-way thing. And I think that for Layla and I, it was a real interesting time for us. We got invited to do there's a TEDx talk which Chris Diamond ran TEDx that year in Sheffield, and there's a talk where we talked more about the project. We can put those links in the show notes. I think it's still up there. So from there, after doing that, I decided what I wanted to do. I wanted to work on interesting projects with interesting people. Why, I don't have to do a contract doing this banking thing or whatever. Let's try and do this. And it opened my eyes to the fact that, if you're working freelance, you can work on small prototypes. There are people who are interested in trying things out and experimenting and building things quickly. And sometimes those things might be the start of a startup. Sometimes they might be part of a bigger company that just wants to try something out. And so trying to sort of kind of move into moving to that area was then my sort of aim from then onwards. And that's really why, you know, if you look on LinkedIn and stuff, I might be creative technologist, and I think it's a term that people use in very different ways. But for me, it's about using technology in creative ways, and that might be writing a web application. It might be getting a receipt printer to do stuff. It might be, you know, there's certainly been times where I've been more involved in messing about with things rather than messing about with code. I think now probably I mess about more with code, but it's definitely been a journey of learning new things and just understanding a bit more about what's out there that previously I hadn't really seen before.
So how would you actually describe that change from what you started out doing in 2011 to what then you started to transition into in 2012?
Yeah, so by default, I dropped into getting a contract and working on that. So this is something I would call myself at that time. I was working as a contractor doing contracts, and then from 2012 onwards, I think for me, I would call myself more a freelancer, where I'm in a place where I might not be working on one project at a time. I'll be working on multiple things, often in parallel, and I would have multiple clients. So of course, it doesn't always work out that way, but quite often someone would have something they'd need doing, and maybe it was just they only had a day a week where you would work on that. So I think that sort of shift from thinking, okay, I'm just going to work on this one thing and I can really focus on that, to actually I'm going to go in all sorts of different directions, and sometimes that'll be at the same time, and hopefully it'll be with people. I think there's almost like you can almost do a diagram of where you've got interesting work and boring work and well paid and free. And ideally you want to be in that sort of interesting, well paid area. But going freelance for me meant actually I'm going to do some interesting stuff that might be not very well paid at all, but because I'd rather do that interesting stuff. And maybe there'll be some stuff which is, you know, is going to keep me going and it's going to be well paid, but it's not that interesting. But the things that I really want to avoid is the not interesting, badly paid stuff.
Yeah.
But that's not, you know, I've done that, you know, I've done plenty of that, and I think that's one of the, if, you know, talking later about advice and lessons, that whole thing about when to say no, but we can talk about that later.
And what do you think are the main differences between working freelance and as a contractor?
Yeah, so I think different people see this in different ways. For me, if I'm working on a contract, I'm generally focused on that project, and it might be a 3-6 month contract. It's something I've signed to say, I'm going to work with you for the next 3 months or 6 months, building these things or whatever, or being a consultant about this or whatever it is. And during that time, I'm going to be focused on you. I'm not going to be looking at other stuff. There might be a few things I need to pick up and maintain or whatever, but that's it. And I'll be saying no to other things. Whereas when I'm in sort of freelance mode, it's more, I'll have multiple things going at a time. Need to be a lot more careful about how I organize my time and my day, but I've also then got that flexibility where I can say, oh, it's a nice afternoon this afternoon, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to go and do that, and that's completely fine to do that. Or another day it might be, oh, there's a meetup or something going on in the evening, and I'd really like to do that, and that's completely fine for me to do that in that freelance flexibility that you've got. And I work as a limited company, so I can switch between both those modes. And I did, after that initial contract, I hadn't really done any contracts like that until last year, where I decided sort of September time, and over the summer things were particularly quiet in terms of freelance work. My idea just before the pandemic hit was to, after doing the Energy Sparks work, which was quite a big chunk of work, I wanted to really re-establish some of my networks with other clients and people that I've worked with in the past, and go down to London. And I've always quite liked getting London-based projects and bringing them to Sheffield, because I think they get better value for that, and it's good for Sheffield to get some of that work out of the big smoke. But yeah, pandemic nobbled that really, so wasn't able to do that. So September sort of time, there's I took this contract with Free Agent, the accounting company, and so I was, you know, from September through to the end of March, I was very much in contract mode, and just focusing on doing that. And again, that was some interesting work, and the thing that I particularly enjoyed about it was a really good team, a really friendly team, and you can't take that for granted. So it was great. But now I'm kind of back in freelance mode again.
Welcome back.
Yeah, but it's funny because, you know, I sort of stopped that project. We did had Easter off, and then people, it's almost like I've not advertised it, but then a few people started getting in touch with different pieces of work. It's like, you know, how does that work out?
How do they know?
How do they know? They know more than me.
That's great to hear. What are ideal projects for you, and who do you most like to work with?
Yeah, so I think that quite often when I've been working freelance, I've ended up taking on more than just the developer or consultant role. Quite often you end up doing bits of project management, or being bits of test, or actually, you know, doing sort of kind of business analysis where you're talking to the actual clients, digging a bit more, or doing a bit of design, and you end up having lots of hats that you keep on changing, and that can be quite tricky. So what I quite enjoy is working on a project where you're working with other good people who know what their roles are, and you're all pulling and working in the same direction. So I think, you know, there's lots of things I'm interested in that I'd like to work on. So, you know, I love railways. I'd love to work on a railway project. I like maps. I'd like to work on a mapping project. You know, I like music. It'd be good to work on a music project. But I think what trumps those interests for me is being part of a good team. And that's what I said what was good about working with Free Agent was that it felt like we were all heading in the same direction, and people knew what their roles were. So I didn't have to worry about design, because we had a designer, and having good managers, because I think I've worked with a lot of project managers and product managers and engineering managers over my whole career, and the good ones are hard to find. It's very easy for people for managers just to focus on the numbers or their goals or their targets, but they're working with those who shield you from the stuff that you don't need to know about, and support you when you're struggling and you're stuck. Those are the ones that are like gold dust. And if you're working with people like that, you're generally quite happy to keep on working with them. So an ideal project for me now is that sort of blend of a team of different people, but with a common goal, where each person's strengths can actually come out, and that's living the dream, that is.
When work isn't just coming to you, what's been a successful approach for you to find new work?
So I think that for me, again, I've been fortunate in that word of mouth has really been useful to me. So by having a presence within Sheffield, there's a lot I'm sure there's lots of people that don't know me, but having been able to work somewhere like Technophobia and making that sort of those contacts, and then various, you know, meetups in Sheffield, that's also useful. Doing the happenstance thing, that really opens some doors, and they're making those contacts so that you're open in what you can do, and that and people know that. So word of mouth is really helpful. But I think also I've got some pieces of work from Twitter. So just by doing random things. So I tweeted about, one day I was thinking how it'd be interesting to build like an API, a way of people exploring the Doctor Who universe, right? So get me all the Doctors, get me all the episodes, get me all the episodes for that. Yeah. And I just tweeted about, wouldn't that be interesting? And someone said, oh, you should talk to this person. And I talked to that person who was working at the BBC. and he was also a Doctor Who fan, and we had a bit of chat about that. And they said, well, we're not working on, we did some Doctor Who work, but we're working on a thing with the Archers at the moment, the Radio 4 drama, which I'm listening to. And so from that, I had maybe 2 or 3 meetings where I'd go down to London and just meet up for a chat and a coffee. And then one day they said, actually, we've got a week's worth of money. If you'd like to do some work with this Archer stuff, we'd like to work with you. And from that 1 week's work and doing that, and then a number of other follow-on projects then came from it, which meant that from sort of, 2014, 15, 16, around then, I was almost every year I had a small project to do with that team, building on what we'd done before. And that all just came from me tweeting and chatting to people. So you can't underestimate sometimes the power of social networks and stuff. And it's looking out for conferences and other opportunities too. There was a thing called Interface, which ran quite a few years ago now, but the idea was bringing technologists and small businesses who would like to work with arts and culture together with arts and culture institutions. And it was a bit like speed dating, and you sort of went around and some people said they'd like to talk to you. And one of the people I spoke to at that was someone who worked for the London Philharmonic Orchestra. And the same with them, they said, look, we've got all this data, we don't really know what to do with it. We've got this horrible system that has all the historical performances that we've done, including the programs and all that, and we'd like to do something with it. And again, just a week's worth of work, what can you do in that time? So I built an Explorer, which allowed you to then browse the times and search and find things. And you could say, oh, well, the London Phil went on tour to Sheffield in whatever year, and this is what they played when they were here. And it did a little map of the locations and those kind of things. And those sort of events are really useful to keep your eyes on and to look out for, especially if you want to work in that area. And for me, doing arts and culture stuff, I've always found interesting, because quite often there is hidden stores of data that people don't know what to do with. Museums, obviously, some museums are very well organized with their data, but a lot of the time there's just all bits and bobs all over the place. And to be able to say, yeah, just give me that Excel spreadsheet and those 300 word documents and we'll do something with it, can be a lot of fun. It can be really interesting. It could also be a right pain. But those kind of projects can be great.
It must be amazing to see what you can do in a week.
Yeah, so it's sometimes not as much as you'd like, and I think sometimes you've ended up spending a bit more than a week's time, because you can just I'll spend another day on this, I'll do that, just to get something that that the client is going to be happy with. And sometimes that leads on to other things. Sometimes, more often than not, it doesn't. But it's just, again, it's a nice thing to have in your portfolio. And you always, for me, I want to learn new stuff every day, really. And that's the other thing. I think, talking about the ideal teams, it's great working with people that are smarter than you, because you're always learning stuff. And I'm always up for that. I know my limitations. I know that there's plenty of people who are faster than me or quicker than me, smarter than me, braver than me, better than me at different things. And working with them is great, because you can just learn from them.
It sounds like your work is very varied, but what skills would you say that you're using on a regular basis?
Yeah, so mainly my sort of kind of go-to is programming in Ruby and using the Ruby on Rails framework for building web applications. That's kind of like my standard go-to. And I picked that up after happenstance. So I kind of, before that, I was doing using Java and other programming languages, and I thought I could see that using Ruby and Rails, you could build something quickly in a week that could do stuff. And there was I could see that a lot of other people at the time who were doing what I wanted to do, that's what they were using. So I kind of picked that up, and that's really my mainstay for the last 9 years or so, has been doing that. But again, being kind of technologist and being open to other stuff, you end up getting involved in all sorts of things. So quite often, it's being able to learn quickly and on your feet. I think that that sort of those problem solving skills that I've picked up over my career are still just as relevant today as they've always been. I've quite often ended up, I don't really do work with WordPress, for example, but quite often people have had problems or issues that I've ended up, they've got nowhere else to turn. It's like, okay, well, I'll see if I can at least get this working. And so having that sort of broad technology skills where you don't necessarily, there's lots of things I don't really know about, but I'm generally quite good at working out how to fix them or how to solve them. Or if not, I think one of the other really key things, especially about being freelance, and one of the things in Sheffield is if you can't fix something, it's great if you know other people who are specialists in those areas. So, I know that if someone comes to me and it's a Microsoft-based project, then I would say, well, I've got friends who work at Razor. Go and talk to them, or about machine learning. Go and talk to them. They'll be able to help you out. Or it's more work from sort of a government basis where people want someone who use all the government GDS skills. And so it's like, okay, well, go and talk to Nimble. They'll help you with that. Or go and talk to Hive. They'll help you with that. And I think that being able to, it's another way, a good way of sort of building up your network of what work you can do is by when stuff does come along, is by pointing people in the right direction. So I think, again, I know my limitations, and I think that if I know that someone could do a much better job, I'll pass them on as soon as I can, really.
Do you know many freelancers in Sheffield who do similar work with digital or tech?
Not as much as I used to. I know a few. I think recently a lot of the people I know who been doing what I sort of do, nationally, have stopped or have got jobs. And I understand that, and I think I feel that a bit myself. I think at some point there's something very attractive about actually that stability of saying, actually, I'm going to work for a company that I like, and maybe in a team that I like, and doing all that. And I think that it's something that I think about from time to time. With freelance work, when you are spinning lots of plates and you've got lots of things going on, that's tough. And on the other hand, when you don't have any work and you're worried because, like, where's the next project coming from, that's tough as well. And sometimes it'd be nice to just turn up at work every day and just do your job and finish at the end of the day and go home again. So there's I can really see those pulls, but it feels to me like so obviously I'm a Sheffield Digital member, and that's really great to be part of that community. I'm also Sheffield Creative Guild member, and I think that supporting those two organisations is really important. And I think that I've been to some of the Sheffield Digital events, I've been to some of the Sheffield Creative Guild events, and that's a good way of just meeting other people and building that network up of people who do like what you do. But I do feel, I feel either there's less people doing freelance stuff in my sort of area in Sheffield than there was, or I've lost touch with that network a bit. And that's partly because of the pandemic and things not happening in real place, I think.
How do you usually sort out getting paid for your work?
That's a very good question. So for me, I know some people who've certainly been badly burnt and, for example, would invoice 50% first upfront or whatever. I've kind of been a bit more lax with that. And again, I hold my hands up, it's from a point of privilege, because I built up that little fund at the beginning. It means that I don't necessarily have to chase late payers, because I've got a buffer, really, so I can keep on getting paid. I use Free Agent for my accounts, and they automatically, if an invoice is late, they automatically email a reminder to the person to say you've not paid me, which I'm a bit conflict averse, and I think that I don't like chasing people up when they're late, because I guess I generally hope that people are late paying in good faith, that there's been something going on there, and a reminder will help them. But yeah, I've had to, I've had to badger some people. Sometimes it gets to a stage where you think, what's going on, and especially when you've done the work, it's pretty grim, really. So it's not a huge thing for me, but I do think that businesses have a real responsibility, especially to freelancers, to make their payments when they should be done, because other people are not in the privileged position I'm in, and they need that cash flow coming through. And I think it's scandalous, really, when big companies late pay. I really do. I think it's really unfair.
And how do you go about deciding what to charge? Do you usually have a conversation about that, or have you kind of got your set rate for certain types of projects?
So when I first started, I wasn't really sure what to charge. But because I did the work back for Phobia, Capita had a standard day rate that they paid. So that was I just took that, and that's how I started. And then slowly over the years, I've sort of bumped that up when I've been busy and when it's felt right to do that. So I think probably I'm around the average of what you would pay for an experienced software engineer in Ruby land, I think. But some projects I've discounted because I've really wanted to do them, or I've done a fixed price quote and said this is how long it's going to take, and have been, especially if it's, I've done some work with either charities or non-profit organisations, and I think that some ways I'd rather help them out a bit than just charge my full rate. So I can be flexible with that. And I think it is really hard. I think if you're someone who, I guess, I don't know, it just feels a bit weird sometimes talking about day rates and money for me. So sometimes you just need to say, right, this is my day rate, and then just leave leave it at that. And if they say, oh, well, actually, we can't do that, and I really want to do it, then okay, we'll talk about it. There was one piece of work actually after Easter where it was one of those situations which you sometimes get where you've got the actual client, and then you've got another sort of company that's working for them, and there was another agency and another agency, and then I would have been about here, and they were just like, no, we can't pay your day rate. And I was like, well, of course you can't, because you're taking your cut, and you're taking your cut, and you're taking your cut, you're taking your cut. And it's like, fine, it's like, that's okay. I'm not, I'm not that bothered about it. So yeah. I'm in the position where I've just finished doing this big 7-month contract, so that's okay. I can walk away from that. But I think that a classic freelance situation is that we undercharge, and then we suddenly find out what other people are charging, or and it's like, oh, blimey, what do we do now? And I think that sometimes a bit of transparency and openness is required. But I think that, again, it's very privileged to be in a situation where you're a software engineer where rates are relatively high. But I had some business coaching once from someone who did sort of management consultancy, and they were like, "What? Why is your day rate so low? Mine's over double that." I'm like, it's astounding when you hear what some people kind of, I won't say get away with, but it's the standard for what they do.
Yeah, so it's an interesting topic, because it is sometimes an awkward thing for people to talk about. So it's interesting to hear different people's perspectives. So thank you for sharing yours. Can you share any challenges that you faced along the way and your general approach to resolving problems?
So I made a few notes on this because I thought, so one of the real challenges being freelance for me is being having all those different roles quite often with different pieces of work, and then having other projects going on at the same time. So it's one thing to be jumping from this project where you're working on X to jumping on this project where you're working on Y, to where you've got your project management hat on an X, and then you're with Y, you need to have a think about some engineering, and then you need to go back to X and think, and that's that context switching and doing all those kind of different things is really difficult. And I think that, so some projects that I've worked on, I've actually said to the client, for this project, I would like to work with, I'd like a project manager, I'd like a designer, and sometimes, you know, maybe someone else as well. And maybe those people are part-time in there, but I'd just like to know that that either you're going to cover it or you're going to pay me enough for me to cover those roles, because that'll bring out the best in all of us to do that. So that's one approach to sort of help with that. Another approach is to say no, you just can't do it. And I think that sort of being able to plan and to be organized and to make sure you keep those communications channel open with the client is another way of helping that, where you try and preempt any of the project management issues, because sometimes it's like deadlines or whatever, and it's just like making sure that everyone's still on the same page, and that, you know, that people understand what is going to be given to them and when. And part of that as well is the being able to make sure that you are you're being honest and open with them if there's a problem at your end as well. So, you know, being a parent in a pandemic, for example, a client who's flexible enough to understand that you're doing homeschooling, or that some days you're actually just going to have to be 100% focused on the kids and you're not going to do any work for them, is really important. So, and I think getting some of that stuff sorted out up front is really helpful if you can do that. That challenge, the freelance challenge of quiet times and busy times, I'm still not very good at dealing with that. I generally get stressed when I'm too busy, and I get stressed when I don't have any work. And there's a little sort of happy sort of balance in the middle bit where maybe you don't have work for a week, where you think, oh, this is okay. And I think that sometimes what we need there is just, it's relying on the support of the wider community sometimes. And I think sometimes with the pandemic and how things are worked out, I think it's easy to feel alone and not to feel as if anyone is looking out for you. And that's, I think, is one of the real challenges of being freelance, is that who's got your back. I don't get the you know, the appraisal where a manager pats you on the back and says, oh, you've had a good year this year or whatever, or someone pats you on the back and says, yeah, you've done great, but I think next year, I think these are the things that you need to look at doing. And you don't get that. And I think that for me anyway, I'm someone who does like a pat on the back and needs a bit of an affirmation every now and then. And sometimes you finish a project with the client and they're like, oh, James, we're really pleased with what you've done. But you sometimes yourself don't even feel that yourself. You've just, like, you know, got over the finish line and you think, oh my goodness, I've finished it. And I think that's a real challenge. I think having friends or people within the communities who look out for each other is something that I need more of, and being honest about it. But as well, I think it's something that we all probably could do with, especially in freelance world. Saying no to people, that's a challenge. I do find it hard, especially when you're being quiet and you know you need some work. I think that being able to sort of, yeah, I guess having that little buffer helps with that. But sometimes work does come along and you think, I know I could probably do this, or maybe it's a bit much to do, but there's some warning bells going off, or there's some signs I can see that I'm not 100% happy with. It's just having that being able to say, actually, no, I'm gonna pass on this one, because you get afraid that maybe if you say no to that, then word will get around that you're an awkward customer or something. You know, and you do feel that. I feel that. But actually, sometimes you got to look out for yourself. And if the person who's asked you and you've said no because you maybe you're too busy or whatever, if they've got any time or respect for you, they'll come back again another time.
I think, yeah, that's some really good advice there already. Is there any other advice that you can offer to people who might be thinking about freelance work as a creative technologist or a technology consultant?
Yeah, I think that I think it's having that network. So building a network before you jump is useful if you can do that. And I was, fortunate enough to have friends who were already working freelance. So I was able to share the office with, who was able to talk through a lot of the details beforehand. And I think that sometimes is what you need. I think that so get involved with Sheffield Creative Guild, get involved with Sheffield Digital. If there's meetups in the languages or technologies or disciplines that you're involved in, get involved. And maybe that's in Sheffield, maybe that's wider, but try and make some time to do those sort of things. I think for me as well, having having friends, having in some way kind of a buddy or mentor or someone who you can talk about the things that you're worried about or whatever, can be useful. And maybe that's something we can think about more, Sheffield Digital. And then once you sort of started, I think having a rainy day fund is really important in terms of managing stress and worry, because there will always be quiet times when you're freelance, and to be able to know that you can still pay yourself and keep things going is really important. And I appreciate not everyone was in the fortunate position I was, where I could do that. But even if it means actually, just working out, putting some money aside and, using an old computer for a bit or whatever to do that, I think that's really helpful. And once things are going, if you can put some money in a pension, believe me, after these all my years in working, I still don't have enough money in my pension, and it's very tempting to leave that late. But if you're working for, especially if you're a limited company and you're making some profit, get that in a pension, some of it in a pension anyway. And especially if you're relatively young and you're starting out, then it's you don't have to put too much in for it to make quite a difference later on. It says I feel like an old man, but it really does help remove stress later. I think working out for yourself, what works best, what's the best way for you to work? What are the things that work for you? Are you a morning person? Actually, if you freelance, you get up when the sun comes up and you work until lunchtime, then you've got the afternoon to yourself. Great, do it. Don't think you've got to do 9 till 5. You don't need, you don't have to have an office, you don't have to have co-working space. All those things are available if you want them, but make sure that you're playing to your own strengths as a freelancer. Make sure that you are giving that flexibility that you have, make sure that you use it in a way that is good for you. And I think deciding a bit about how specialized you want to be as well. I'm relatively general in what I do, but I do specialize in certain things. And I think that there's some people who are super deep experts at certain subjects, and they've worked out where that work comes from, and they can go in and do that work and do that. Or do you want to be a bit wider and try and go for other things? And I think that can very much depend upon your situation. It can depend upon what field you're working in, but it can also depend upon you as well. Are you someone who wants to, find that they're up to the neck in something they don't know that well, but they find they really enjoy that challenge of working out how to get out there and learning new things? Or are you someone who is much happier just kind of working in that field which you know about and carry on doing that? And I think that and maybe that isn't something you know about straight away, but I think if you can think about it and talk with other people about it, then that can give you a really good start.
Just lastly, where do you think people should go to find out more about Ruby on Rails?
That's a good question. Come to me and I'll tell them that.
Yeah.
I think that Ruby and Rails is interesting because it was like when I was working at Technophobia, it was very trendy. It was very, all the hipsters were into it. And, certainly at the time I looked down on a bit because it just felt quite immature and there were lots of changes going on. By the time I started working with it, it felt a lot more solid and stable and less trendy, and more reliable. And it's interesting because, of course, since then, I would say that there's been lots of JavaScript frameworks, things that have come along, which are also very, and there's been a lot of churn and change there. And whereas I've sort of stuck with something a bit more stable. So I think if you are wanting to think about Ruby, it's a programming language that's it's optimized for programmer happiness. That's the thing behind its whole design, is it should make you happy to use it. There's a lot of Ruby work going on at the moment. It did go a bit quiet, but the last year or so it seems to have really picked up. But learning that there's plenty of online resources for learning the Ruby language, and there's classic books. You can get up to speed very quickly with Ruby and Rails in terms of building something. What takes time is learning how to do things either the right way or some of the more sort of complex things that you come across, or building something that scales. People have often said it doesn't scale. It does scale, but you've got to know the right ways to do these things. And for me, I already knew a lot of programming, but I picked up Ruby and Rails myself, but I've learned a lot more from working with other people. And I'm not sure it's quite as popular as it used to be, but certainly 6-7 years ago, hack days were very popular, where you could get together with people and just work on something and do that. And that's a great way of picking up new skills and learning how to code better. Also, there's loads of open source Ruby projects in GitHub and GitLab and all over the place, where you can look and see how people do things as well. So there's lots of Sheffield Ruby Group as well, which is obviously not meeting in person at the moment, and that's there's a channel on Sheffield Digital about that, and I think that's if people were learning and had questions or problems, then that's a great place to ask some questions, because it's not super active at the moment, but people are generally pretty helpful, so someone will help you out if you get stuck.
Excellent. You're off the hook. Thank you for a great interview.
Oh, thanks for the chat. I very much enjoyed it.